By a vote of 2 to 1, a special state panel voted in January to lower the overtime threshold law for farm workers, which is currently at 60 hours a week, calling for a gradual drop down of 4 hours a week every 2 years starting in 2024 until reaching an overtime threshold of 40 hours a week in 2032. To discuss what this could mean for the state's agriculture industry, we're joined by Kendra Lamb, a dairy farmer operating in Western New York, who testified against lowering the threshold at a public comment period earlier this year. Welcome to the show, Kendra.
Thank you for having me.
So, virtually every hourly employee in New York is already able to receive overtime benefits when they hit 40 hours of work in a week. Why isn't that a good threshold for the farm industry?
So that is correct. And it's always been recognized that agriculture is just a little bit unique when it comes to the work that we do. So farm workers are working with a lot of elements that are a little bit unpredictable. Our seasons here in New York are not regular. We can see that if we look out the window right now. And so we're working around weather patterns that can be unpredictable, which definitely have an effect on harvest or on a day like today in the ways that we care for our animals. So when crops are ready, we have to harvest them in a more timely manner. Agriculture is also unique because as farmers, we're not able to set the price that we receive for our products. So I like to give an example of just what milk prices have done for us as dairy farmers since the time that I was born. So I was born in 1982. The milk price that was paid to my family at that time was $14.50 a hundredweight, and a gallon of gas was $1.22, and the New York minimum wage was $2.24. In 2020, the average milk price in New York was $17.10, so it's only up 18%. Whereas, as you might imagine, all of the other costs that are passed on to the farmer have gone up substantially more. That would include a gallon of gas costing 78% more, and the New York minimum wage, which has continually increased, and in 2020 was up 558% over that number in 1982. So while we would love to be able to pay our employees more for the work that they do, the math isn't working out for us as dairy farmers or in agriculture in general because we're not able to pass that additional cost along through our products like other industries can. So if you compare us to like a FedEx or UPS, when gas prices increase or when the price that they pay to their employees increases, then the cost of their goods would increase accordingly. And for us, we're not able to do that. And so it makes it a situation where farms either go out of business or have to potentially leave the state in order to remain competitive.
While there is the option of price flexibility in those other industries, like you talk about, there is a threshold, though, that people will stop using those services if they become too expensive. And when you talk about the flexibility in your industry and kind of the just unpredictability of it. It makes me think of the tourism industry, and actually even brings me back to my time working for Ben and Jerry's in Saratoga Springs, which is scooping ice cream. And if it was raining during the summer, we would not have a lot of customers. But if it was really hot, we would have a lot of customers. And regardless, we had to have people on call, ready to work. We had to have staff there. So sometimes we would be working a lot. Sometimes we'd be working very little, and they're able to make it work. But with the caveat that there might be other types of variables there. Why isn't that a good comparison? Why shouldn't the farm industry have to be as flexible?
Thinking of our dairy farm and our employees that we have a couple of different groups. And so the scenario that you talk about with and scooping ice cream in the summer would be more relatable to our field crew,
Hmm.
where throughout the winter, things are pretty quiet for them, other than maybe doing some upkeep on machinery. There's not a lot going on. We continue to keep them on staff, and they continue to come in and find work to do. But then during the summertime, it is pretty hectic at times, and the days can get long when we're harvesting or planting. So I see the parallel there. I think the issue for us is we are competing on a nationwide, a federal price system, and dairy farmers don't have control over the price that they charge. We receive a check in the mail weeks after our milk has been shipped out. So that's always a little bit of a fluctuation and not something that we're able to regain our costs through the pricing that we receive. The other concern I have with New York trying to lead the way in a lot of these regulations is that it's going to drive business out of New York. Food is going to continue to be consumed in New York, and the intention is that there would be better provision for the employees or for the environment through the regulations that New York State provides. But what's going to happen is that milk is just going to come in from outside of New York State that doesn't have those same restrictions and is not operating under the same criteria. So the intention is there, but the end result is not going to gain what the hope was for this.
And you have practical kind of experience or knowledge of that dynamic, right? Because you've seen Ohio as a more attractive area for growth, right?
That's correct. So we do have a dairy farm in Western Ohio as well. And when we first purchased the farm in Ohio, the rates that we were paying to employees were pretty similar between the two states. But with the increasing minimum wage in New York and now the 60-hour overtime threshold, the two have differed greatly in the last couple of years. And so, again, similar milk price that we're receiving in the Northeast order. However, the cost of producing that milk are significantly higher in New York State.
The governor's budget includes some sort of tax credit to help cover the cost of overtime on farms, and with the caveat that we don't really understand how it will work, in part because the administration hasn't really explained it, and we also don't know whether it'll make it into the final budget. Could a tax credit make the lower overtime threshold workable in some way, shape, or fashion? Is there a version of this that you think could enable your farms to continue operating in New York and potentially grow in New York?
I think there's a lot still to be seen on the tax credit. So while that is something that could potentially be of assistance, it's also something that would be reconsidered every year in the budget. And depending on a lot of the criteria that go through there, may or may not actually end up benefiting the farms. And to be honest, for a lot of farms, it just may be too late. So the price, obviously, we're paying paychecks weekly, and the tax credit would have to come much more retroactive to try to reimburse those costs. So a lot of details still to be seen on that, but our hope is still that Governor Hochul would listen to the 70% of those who did testify to the wage board who were asking for the overtime threshold to stay at 60 and would consider that in her decision making going forward.
But sticking with the credit, it sounds like what you're saying then is something that would be meaningful, would have to be something that would look backwards as well as forward, have long term stability, and also have a meaningful amount of money behind it, right?
That's correct. Yes. And I would also say, in terms of talking about Governor Hochul, that for months, farmers across our state have been inviting the governor, Commissioner Reardon, and state legislators to visit our farms. And we hope that that invitation will be accepted because I think to really understand the complexity of agriculture and our businesses, to see the compassion that our family and our employees have for one another, for our cows, for our land, that can be best seen when you're on the farm, and especially if they have the opportunity to interact with our employees themselves and to hear directly from those who are affected by the wage board hearing.
Well, turning things back to Ben and Jerry's again, because that's how life works for me. I was an hourly employee, but we had a manager who was a salaried employee and had to be there, whenever and for whatever, and it didn't matter how many hours they worked, they had a set salary. Is something like that an option for the farm industry, and is that a potential compromise, setting, salaried employees who will work potentially more flexible shifts?
So that's a good point. And we do on the farm have some managers, similar to what you said, who are a salaried employee. However, Department of Labor is aware that that could also be abused. And so there's very specific criteria for what constitutes a managerial level employee who would qualify for salary. And so for the majority of our employees who are milking cows or caring for our calves or driving the chopper, they won't qualify for the criteria of being a salaried employee.
So the gradual drop down in the overtime threshold, assuming it does take effect, would begin in 2024, moving 4 hours a week every 2 years. Do you anticipate this would be, I guess, a bleeding of the industry, or would this be a quick death?
I think the fact that it is stretched out over a longer period of time makes it more of like a bleeding that you've talked about, if you want to use that term. But I think it gives farmers the opportunity to decide what they want to do and where they want to go from there. There's definitely going to be a number who are a little further along in their career and may decide that this is the time for them to get out of the business. And I know at least one colleague that I have on a board that I'm on is planning on putting up solar panels instead of milking cows. And so that's unfortunately for the employees of these farms, it's going to mean lost jobs. And it's also going to mean lost business for a lot of the local businesses that work with the farmers because there is a multiplication effect of those who are interacting with us, the impact that our farm has on our local community just by being here through the electrical contractors and the plumbing supplies and construction supplies, and then all of those other businesses, agribusinesses that work with our farm.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We've been speaking with Kendra Lamb. She's a dairy farmer operating in Western New York. Kendra, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.